Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Joseph Zelezny. He's the Yukon candidate for the People's Party of Canada in the upcoming federal election. His website, yukonppc.com. Joseph, welcome to HowStreet.com radio.
Thanks. Great to be here with you today.
Joseph, first of all, just a little bit of your background, who you are, what you've done, and why you're running for the People's Party.
So I moved to the Yukon about 3 years ago. Before that, lived in Vancouver, Edmonton, Toronto, and worked in a couple different industries, but generally in the IT sector. And sort of experienced firsthand how rapidly things are changing in Canada after seeing a lot of job losses, whether it was in the oil sands or due to automation or other regulatory hurdles. And so when I saw that Max had split from the Conservative Party and started the PPC, it was sort of an inspirational moment of, hey, this is something that's very necessary, and it's a party that's made up of Canadians who honestly just want to fix things and do things better and ensure that the focus is on Canadians and not the rest of the world at our expense. So I decided to put my hat in the ring, and here we are.
Canada is a natural resource-rich country, and the Yukon probably one of the most naturally rich areas on the planet. Are there hurdles being put in place to stop or slow natural resource exploration and extraction?
It definitely seems that way at various levels of government. Most recently and urgently, federal bills C-69 and the carbon tax are having a compounding effect. And essentially, those two bills are legislating overly burdensome regulations without any practical benefits and imposing much higher costs on any sort of resource exploration or development. And essentially it's giving companies and investors and even workers incentives to go elsewhere where these hurdles don't exist. Taking into account gender issues for a resource project and having absolutely no certainty when it comes to the permitting process, it doesn't make any business sense. And so companies will be very they don't have any incentive to take on significant litigation risk due to vague clauses, and ultimately they can go elsewhere and be successful.
The Federal Court of Appeal says again there's 6 Aboriginal groups who feel they weren't listened to adequately. Do we have legislation that will allow just continuous challenge of just about anything that's done to extract resources, and do you think that needs to be changed?
Well, it seems that way, but it isn't necessary. This all started many decades ago, and it doesn't even have anything to do with protecting the environment. Canada already has some of the best safety and environmental standards in the world, and allowing what oftentimes are frivolous lawsuits isn't doing anyone any good, because on one hand, people like the benefits of social programs, but they don't realize how all these programs are funded, and basically there comes a cost to this particularly for the economy and enabling the type of prosperity that Canada was at some point known for. Now, there's so much debt everywhere and regulatory uncertainty, and we just saw another, I think, 70,000 private sector jobs lost in the last month, and that's on top of already hundreds of thousands of job losses in the natural resource sector over the last few years.
Is there technology available that allows mining and resource extraction to be environmentally friendly?
Definitely. There's, thanks to inventive private sector, there's a lot of technologies that are either in process of development or commercialization, or already being used in pilot plants or in commercial operations. Some of these include using non-toxic chemicals to extract gold or silver or other metals, and the same applies for other oil and gas technologies. In addition, a lot of folks don't realize that these industries actually put a lot of money towards remediation, that it's actually part of existing laws, as well as having emergency response tools and techniques available. And so, for example, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, since that keeps getting delayed, one of the vessels to respond to spills isn't being built, right? So there's consequences to these delays, and it's also hypocritical because at this point Canadian oil and gas demand is growing, and so Canada is importing more oil and gas from all around the world, while at the same time putting obstacles for our own resource development. And just one additional point here is we're importing that oil and gas at full price, whereas we're exporting at about half price, and we've already had a double-digit gas tax for decades. So to have another carbon tax on top of it is absolutely destructive, and that tax isn't applied on imports.
Yeah, we had some people calculate Canada's buying foreign oil at the rate of $4 million worth an hour. Shouldn't we be using our own oil first?
Well, exactly, especially since we have some of the best safety standards, environmental standards, human rights standards, and constantly developing better and better ways of doing things. I saw that firsthand at one of the sites I worked at in the oil sands. It was cleaner than a parking lot, right? Like safety and environmental protection were paramount.
Has Prime Minister Justin Trudeau handed over control of Canada to the United Nations?
Definitely seems that way. I mean, he called Canada the first post-national state, but that wasn't consulted with Canadians, and it's preposterous and disrespectful that essentially we're being sold out. Even a recent example of exempting Chinese steel from tariffs to be used on LNG projects in British Columbia is just kicking Canadians where it hurts, because that's going to cost us a lot of jobs, and there's no real benefit. A lot of this steel that ends up getting imported is substandard and isn't made with the same environmental considerations, and so it's very hypocritical.
Is this causing problems for the natural resource industry?
Well, it definitely is, because there's uncertainty for everything, and there's a hesitance to invest in this sort of climate. A couple of years ago, things were looking up, and that's one of the reasons why I moved to the Yukon. And since then, we've seen a real slowdown. There was definitely a bit of a rush for a number of projects to begin construction or their permit applications before Bill C-69 got enacted. But now, moving forward, I think there's going to be a lot of either waiting or divesting that's going to potentially take place because of additional costs and greater uncertainty.
Do you feel the people in the Yukon are being ignored by what goes on in Ottawa?
Absolutely, and I think that's been the case for a long time. You can't legislate prosperity, right? And but you can enable equal opportunities. But those opportunities aren't being enabled, and a lot of people are struggling. The jobs they had working in the exploration sector aren't there. They're working 2 to 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet without any hope of things getting better, especially with the regulations and additional costs that are being imposed on the natural resource sector.
We'll have more with Joseph Zelezny when we return after the break.
I'm Douglas Mason, CEO of Naturally Splendid, symbol NSP on the TSX Venture Exchange. Naturally Splendid is a biotechnology and consumer products company focused on the global cannabis and health markets. Naturally Splendid is expanding distribution in this rapidly growing market with products currently in Canada, the USA, South Korea, Germany, and Australia. To view our comprehensive company presentation and for more information, please visit our website at naturallysplendid.com.
Grand Portage Resources' Herbert Gold Project in southeast Alaska highlights increased gold resource, indicated and inferred, of 860,000 ounces, in excess of 10 grams per ton gold. Expansion drilling is planned on the Herbert Gold property for the summer of 2019. Grand Portage Resources trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTCQB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Joseph Zelezny, candidate for the People's Party of Canada in the Yukon. Joseph, are socialism and communism hiding behind the so-called environmentalist banner?
Well, it definitely seems that way. The IPCC was formed in 1988, and that's sort of where the first use of the term global warming stemmed from. And back in 1990, Gorbachev, the secretary of the Communist Party, suggested creating an international Green Cross and pushed for international environmental monitoring system and a covenant to protect unique environmental zones. And that slowly led to efforts to ban snowmobiles in Yellowstone National Park, and some of that's even happening in Canada, and trying to limit the amount of use that Canadians are able to have of the great outdoors. And so all of these things ultimately support UN environmental programs. And back to the roots, the Communist Party was supporting environmentalism as a way of basically gaining control. And anytime there's contradictory information, there's a strong push to control the narrative. And even things like sea levels, for example, using the same place of measurement, sea levels in 2019 are actually lower than they were in 1914. Right? So there's a lot of fluctuations up and down over time, and the politicization of all these conclusions just isn't serving Canadians. It's an attempt to persuade people to surrender their rights and freedoms for the sake of environmental protection. But at the same time, there's a lot of hypocrisy and empty virtue signaling, because we have raw sewage being dumped into waterways in Canada, but there's only outrage about apparent global warming, or now it's been renamed to climate change, because in certain areas of the world, or even within Canada, we're actually cooling and experiencing record cold temperatures. So trying to control just everything that when it comes to taxing every activity or mandating speech, these are all essentially tenets of communism and methods of gaining control, regardless of perhaps seemingly good intentions. And that's something that the People's Party of Canada is very serious about in terms of doing practical things for the environment, such as ensuring there's no toxic drinking water, to make sure that we don't have raw sewage being dumped, to actually study, for specific to the Yukon, study the habitat of salmon, because as it stands now, climate change is just used as an excuse for why numbers might be fluctuating, when in fact there's no study linking or looking at UVB or C radiation hitting the Earth's surface, looking at erosion and how that may or may not be affecting habitat of salmon for where they're spawning. We have a shifting North Pole. We have different solar radiation. And so there's a lot of aspects that could be affecting the climate, and they're dismissed and discounted and censored, and that's very telling.
We keep hearing that carbon taxes are just another excuse to pad government pockets. If the People's Party forms the next government, should a file be open to look into geoengineering, what it is and what effect it will have on the climate?
Well, that's something you definitely don't hear a lot about, and it definitely ties into perhaps some of the effects we are seeing. I know for a number of years, I think it's still ongoing, but geoengineering is used regularly in Alberta to prevent damaging hailstorms, and that's something that's being done by insurance companies, and those sorts of activities are used in other places around the world, including for the Beijing Olympics, or to increase cloud cover and refill certain reservoirs for hydropower. But what isn't being considered is what are the possible secondary effects of this type of activity. And there's been a fair bit of warning that if we're not studying what the effects of this might be, there may be some local benefit, but there could also be some drawbacks. So, personally, I think it would be important to consider anything and everything that could be affecting our climate or health of Canadians, and not just sort of being silent or pretending things aren't happening when a lot of people are noticing changes.
Is there frustration with all this demand for carbon taxes, with the knowledge that how is a carbon tax going to stop a volcanic eruption or changes in sunspot activity, or the fact that the Earth's orbit changes over time?
Well, and exactly, it's not, right? I've noticed a correlation between a dwindling United Nations budget, an increase in carbon tax revenues, and also an increase in the amounts of hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of Canadian taxpayer dollars going to basically different areas of the world, and those aren't investments. It's just money being spent on who knows what, and I don't see any benefit, and a lot of Canadians would rather have a little bit extra to be able to provide for their families, and they're getting sick and tired of just being demonized in terms of how they live. Canada is one of the coldest countries in the world, and I don't think a lot of people are buying this anymore. Right? If there was something practical or useful that was happening, we would have seen it by now. And a place flooding because it's in a 100-year flood zone, that's not climate change. That's just a regular cycle. And the climate's been changing as long as Earth's existed. So back to what would a PPC government do is address health and safety of Canadians and not go along with this alarmism that's been repeatedly attempted basically every decade. Right? There's always these looming world disasters that never seem to happen. So
we'll have more with Joseph Zelezny right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Joseph Zelezny. Joseph, is the natural resource industry in Canada over-regulated, and should an effort be made to eliminate as much regulation as possible?
I definitely think there is, at this point, an overregulation, especially with, Bill C-69, C-48, the carbon tax. There's no sound logic. It's not being done for the good of the environment. It's just being used as a delay tactic or a measure to prevent any sort of natural resource development. There's a lot of bureaucratic regulations that account to simply filing paperwork, and in many cases, things that perhaps should be regulated aren't, and others that are well regulated don't need the extra regulation. Instead, resources would perhaps be better utilized by ensuring that there is compliance with safety and environmental regulations, and ensuring that the regulations are useful. Essentially, what we should see more of is resetting the incentives that exist. So, in some cases, regulations actually result in benefiting activity that isn't beneficial.
There seems to be a bull market in securities regulation in Canada that directly affects natural resource companies and investors. Would a People's Party government look into eliminating market and business constricting regulations?
Well, kind of more of the same in terms of just too many regulations that are hampering business and creating a lot of uncertainty. And so it all kind of comes back to opening up Canada for business and attracting investment and creating the right incentives to develop the economy and to have useful regulations that aren't overly burdensome.
If the People's Party forms the government, would you bring in a zero tax rate for capital gains?
Yeah, that's definitely part of the platform, in addition to cutting income taxes, reducing business taxes to 10%. And I think this has a huge upside for what could re-stimulate the Canadian economy. I don't understand what the logic is in penalizing people for investing. If anything, that behavior should be rewarded, and so a 0% tax on capital gains, whether it's for individuals or businesses, would actually be rewarding investment and job creation, as well as enabling prosperity, because it never comes without risk. So the risk of starting a new business or making an investment, that's something that will be rewarded by not penalizing for capital gains.
What would a zero capital gains tax do to the natural resource industry and the economy of Canada?
Well, I think it would together with repealing C-69 and repealing the carbon tax, I think it would kickstart the natural resource sector, regardless of whether it's oil and gas or minerals or forestry. These are industries that have been arbitrarily demonized and essentially are the lifeblood of the Canadian economy. Everything trickles down from that, and a lot of small towns and businesses are suffering because they've been forgotten by the government of Canada, and instead people in government currently have been serving non-Canadians.
With Canada being a natural resource-rich country, what could be done to make Canada excel and prosper?
Well, and this sort of ties in everything else we've talked about, and all we have to do is enable it and create the right conditions and incentives, right? If we have good incentives, such as rewarding good investments and environmental protection, then there won't be that worry of having abuse or not taking care of the environment or treating workers right. It's not in anybody's best interest to not take care of the environment, right? So some regulations definitely need to be improved so that compliance is incentivized.
Is the mainstream media in Canada concentrated in too few hands?
It definitely seems that way, especially with over $600 million in tax cuts and subsidies to several selected media companies. There seems to be very little difference in the messages that are portrayed, and it seems that though that funding has resulted in much more favorable coverage of certain activities than otherwise may have come from smaller media outlets that aren't benefiting from these incentives.
Do you feel the People's Party is somehow being deliberately ignored by the mainstream media?
Absolutely. Even certain surveys not including the PPC as an option. We've seen that. There's a lot of shadow banning on social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, or comparison articles, discussing priorities of the different leaders. If they're leaving out Max, I don't see why they would do that, right? If Canadians aren't resonating with the platform of the PPC, then that should be out there for all to see. And trying to exclude Max Bernier from the leaders' debates, it's also showing that either there's something they're afraid of, or they're just trying to control their own narrative to a point that raises a lot of questions as to why it's being done.
Well, take a look at the NDP, where they have an open revolt in New Brunswick, where 14 NDP members have decided to go green. Does that also, the People's Party has candidates already nominated in most ridings, second only to the Liberals. Just from that point of view alone, shouldn't they be included in the debates?
Sorry, so actually, Conservatives now have candidates in every riding, and the PPC has the next highest amount.
Exactly.
So we actually have significantly more than the Liberals or the NDP or the Greens. And, that is very telling. I think we have more than double of what the NDP have, and in addition to that, the Bloc Québécois leader is invited to the national debates, and that party only represents Quebec. So it's, in my view, nonsensical that Max would be excluded and just goes to show either they're afraid of how popular he really is, and how quickly the People's Party is growing in Canada. It's it's done more in 10 months than the Green Party has in 35 years. So exciting times ahead.
Is there foreign influence in Canadian politics and elections?
I think so. It seems to be the case around the world, actually, but it takes many different forms. So, for example, programming algorithms to display certain search results that are able to create a bias in whether it's in illustrating who potential candidates are in a riding or not, or favorable or unfavorable news articles. There's different ways that this can be accomplished. In addition, there have been many non-citizens discovered on the voter rolls, and there seems to, over time, have been a loosening of standards without actual proof of citizenship required to be able to vote. We've even seen instances of international students receiving voter information cards within Canada. So definitely something to be aware of.
With China trying to pull strings on Canada over the Huawei executive extradition hearings and so on, should Canada try to lessen its ties to China trade and try to find new trading partners?
It definitely doesn't seem to make sense why China would be getting beneficial special treatment, for example, as we mentioned, having Chinese steel imports excluded from tariffs, or other more favorable trade conditions. Like that seems to be rewarding bad behavior, and I don't see how that benefits Canadians at all. Given more information, that I don't even think my answer would change, but it's definitely something that raises a lot of eyebrows.
Joseph, how can people find out more about your election campaign and the People's Party of Canada?
So I'll give you two websites, peoplespartyofcanada.ca, and folks from around the country can look up who their candidates are on that website as well as the platform. And then specific to myself, the website is yukonppc.com. Also have links to Twitter, Facebook, email. There's a phone number on the website as well, and even a contact form. And look forward to any questions that people may have.
Joseph, thanks a lot for being on the show.
Thanks, much appreciated. My
guest has been Joseph Zelezny, the Yukon candidate for the People's Party of Canada in the upcoming federal election. His website, yukonppc.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.